My wife and I have been together for more than 12 years. It has not been an easy road with many ups and downs, but we have overcome all the challenges together. We had a wonderful son to whom we always paid proper attention and put the right values in him. However, my happy family life collapsed in just 3 days when I made the mistake of allowing one man into my life. That man turned out to be truly evil. I deeply regret what happened, but I promise he will regret his actions. My name is Jonathan. I'm 35 years old. What I've been through, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I own 3 cafes, a business I've been building for 10 years now, starting right after graduating from university. In my 17 years, I started as a part-time waiter, eventually becoming a chef at one of the good restaurants in our state. By the time I was 25, I had experience in over 10 establishments and had a full understanding of how the business operated. I had always dreamed of opening my own restaurant and was confident that I could make it happen. I loved cooking and bringing joy to people through my food. Then, as a recent graduate, I was dating my future wife Alice, who was 2 years younger than me at the time. I realized that if I wanted to provide a good life for my family, I needed to do what I loved, because what's the point of making a good living doing something you don't like if it doesn't make you happy? I have always found common ground with Alice's parents. Her father was especially supportive of me. The initial funds to start my business came from him. It took me 3 years to get it up and running. At that time, my business started to bring in its first income. During these years, Alice and I got married, and she gave birth to our son Martin, who is now 7 years old. This period was financially unstable. All the money went into developing the business. We lived in the house of Alice's parents in a room of 18 square meters, where there was an old sofa bed, a closet, and a table. We lived in such conditions for 4 years. After that, I was able to pay off all my debts, return the money to Alice's father with interest. Then we bought a small 2-story house on the outskirts of the city and renovated it according to our dreams. We also bought a car, got a Welsh Corgi named Buddy, and did everything we could to be happy. Alyssa always supported me along the way and never regretted her choices. By the time she was 28, she had everything she wanted, and all her efforts paid off. We could afford to travel to different countries: Bali, Greece, Italy, and many others. We dined at fancy restaurants, bought clothes in expensive stores, and rented yachts. 5 years after opening the first cafe, I opened a second, and a year and a half later, I opened a third. So my modest cafe turned into a chain, increasing not only my profits, but also my responsibilities. Alice didn't work outside the house, but she dealt with the financial side of the business. She was my personal accountant, managing our family budget and taking care of my son's upbringing. When I spent entire days at work, she was active in tennis, visiting beauty salons, and getting massages in addition to her household duties. This is a brief overview of my life from age 17 to 35. Now let me tell you about my childhood. I did not grow up in a rich family. You could say we were poor. My father often drank, and my mother worked and took care of the children at the same time. I was not an only child. I had an older brother, Jack, who was 5 years older than me. Things did not work out between us as he was jealous of me. After I was born, my parents began to pay more attention to me, which displeased him. Jack thought I was a braggart because I was doing well in school while he was on the verge of dropping out. My parents praised me more often, and he didn't seem to notice. As a child, I didn't realize the complexity of our relationship, but now, looking back, I feel discomfort at those memories. Jack was never supportive of me. He had little interest in how I was doing. More than that, he tried to cause me problems. I left my parents' house before him and started working and building a life for myself. Jack, on the other hand, continued to lead a wild lifestyle, drinking a lot, following his father's example. I worked hard, studied, and developed. I strived to become a better person because I wanted a different light for my future children. I don't want to say that I didn't love my parents. They never treated me badly. They just lost themselves at some point. My father, for example, never raised a hand to me. My mother was always willing to give everything for her sons. Thanks to my parents, I may have learned to love. For that, I am forever grateful to them. When I was 22 years old, my mother died in an accident. My father went even deeper into alcohol addiction and died 2 years after my mother's death. Jack continued to live in their house. When they both left, I had no claim to the house. Since leaving home, I've only seen Jack a couple times. Mostly he wrote to me asking for money. While I was growing my business and building a family, Jack didn't step forward. He stayed living in our parents' house, working as a bouncer at a club or as a waiter. He tried unsuccessfully to open his own store. As a matter of principle, I didn't offer him a job in my establishments. I thought he should find his own way. Jack always knew what I was doing and how my life was going because I was active on my social media. I wanted to show by example that you can get out of any difficult situation and be happy. This apparently annoyed Jack. When I was a teenager and told him about my desire to start a business, he just laughed. He didn't explicitly say he didn't believe in me, but I could feel it in his words and actions. Now, in the present day, I am 35 years old. I am married to Alyssa, who is 33 years old. Together, we are raising our 7-year-old son, Martin. I have a chain of 3 establishments, a house, a car, and a generally good life. Things were going well, and in November 2023, my wife, son, and I returned from another vacation. We try to go abroad at least 3 times a year, sometimes leaving our son with Alice's parents. I had a busy November as I was planning to open a 4th establishment in another state early next year. While vacationing in Australia with Alice, I met an interesting man who owned a candle manufacturing business that sold worldwide through online stores. He wanted to try his hand at the food industry and offered me a mutually beneficial partnership. I agreed, so the entire month of November and December were busy with work. In the same month of November, my brother Jack wrote to me that he was in a difficult situation. Due to significant debts, our parents' house had been taken away from him. I was genuinely shocked when I learned this news. After my parents died, I renounced my inheritance, giving it entirely to my brother. I hoped that at least he would keep the house. But things turned out differently. Jack started calling me and asking if he could stay with me for a couple weeks until he found a job and bought the house. I offered him a deal. I'd help him buy the house if he stopped drinking and found a stable job. After that, I would gradually help pay off his debts. I thought it was a good offer, giving him a chance to start over at age 40. I also offered to rent him temporary housing, but he declined, claiming he wanted to go down the right path and wanted me to see it in person. I didn't like the idea of letting Jack into my house, so I tried to find alternative ways to avoid it and convince him that I could provide him with temporary housing for a few months. However, he resisted. I decided to discuss this with my wife Alice to make a final decision. I truly loved my brother. I cared for him despite all his shortcomings. At one point, I even felt ashamed that I was successful and he was not. I was always willing to help him, but in a way that made it clear that it wouldn't last forever. After talking to Alice, we came to the unanimous decision to let Jack into our home, but on the condition that he would find a job within a week and be willing to stay for the long term. I was even willing to help him find a job using my connections or by hiring him at one of my establishments if he stopped drinking. If after a week he showed improvement, I would buy back the house and he could move back into it. After that, I wouldn't help him anymore. It seemed like a great idea to me. I wanted to give my brother one last chance to get on the right path, even at 40. After all, it is never too late. I also advised him to find someone to motivate him. I had seen from my own experience that the right life partner can work wonders. So I called Jack and, to my surprise, explained all the terms and conditions. He agreed and came to our place the same evening. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Our son Martin was in his room on the 2nd floor doing his homework. Alice was in the kitchen preparing dinner and getting ready to receive our guest. We decided to put Jack in the living room on the couch since there were only 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, one for us and one for Martin. When the doorbell rang, I went to open it. Standing at the door was Jack with a suitcase that might have belonged to our parents, though I couldn't be sure. It was probably about 20 years old or more when they got it. Jack looked great, and to my delight, he didn't smell of alcohol. He clearly knew that if I smelled alcohol in our house, he would be kicked out immediately. We hugged like brothers, and he walked into the house. Alice had already set the table, and I invited Jack to wash his hands and join us at the table. We sat for about an hour discussing everything in the world. Most of the conversation was led by my wife Alice. She seemed to tell me everything about our lives that evening and more. Jack responded well to the conversation, laughing and joking a lot. I didn't feel any hatred towards him for the past. I believed that people could change, and that change was evident in him. He even shaved and smelled good, although I'm not sure where he did it considering he no longer had a home. The evening ended on a positive note. We chatted a lot and Jack seemed to have adjusted to the surroundings. We showed him where he would be sleeping and explained the house rules. We all wake up at 6 in the morning. Martin leaves for school, Alice does chores and her morning routine. I head off to work. Meanwhile, Jack, accompanied by our dog friend, spends the morning relaxing and starts looking for work. In the evening, we all go to bed. Lying in bed, I decide to ask Alice her opinion of my brother. She said she thought he seemed a little strange. If she were in my shoes, she would have installed a couple of hidden cameras in the house. I wanted to know why she thought that. Alice replied that she just felt the need to do so without giving a coherent answer. My wife is a good judge of character due to her long involvement in spiritual practices. She mentioned that she had intentionally told him about our happy life, and she didn't like his reaction. She sensed falseness, however. I didn't notice anything wrong. I thought everything was fine. I had always listened to her before, but now I felt that she might be exaggerating and cameras were unnecessary in our home. She asked if I was sure of my decision, and I said I would think about it tomorrow. Before I fell asleep, thoughts swirled in my head. There was a man in my house that I hadn't seen in a couple years. I didn't know how he lived or what he did for a living. Crime movies came to my mind where a victim unknowingly lets a maniac into his home. These thoughts frightened me and I had a hard time sleeping. The next morning I woke up exhausted because I hadn't slept well. My wife had made breakfast and Martin was getting ready for school. Jack continued to sleep or just ignored our noise, but we didn't wake him up. I decided to skip breakfast and headed straight to work, or rather my office. I found the 3 cameras I had left in my stockpile. They were good quality cameras. They could be inconspicuously installed anywhere as long as they were well camouflaged. Moreover, I could easily connect them and monitor my house with my phone even when I wasn't home. That's how I kept track of my business. I returned home at 8:30 in the morning. By this time, Martin had already left for school and Alice was doing household chores. I hoped Jack was still asleep. But when I got there, he was already sitting at the table drinking coffee and eating scrambled eggs. Alice understood why I was back, but Jack didn't, so I said I forgot important papers at home, which was actually true. I went up to the second floor, quickly grabbed the documents and got the security cameras out of my work bag, stashing them in the nightstand downstairs. I wished everyone a good day, kissed my wife, and told Jack to start looking for a job. He said he had already found one and I ran out of the house because I had an appointment for 9 a.m. The day flew by. I was consumed with working on important things that I needed to keep up this pace until at least mid-December. Alice managed to go to her treatments during the day, visit her parents, and pick up Martin from school by 3 p.m. Everyone went home and I got back around 10 p.m., tired and hungry. Jack had spent all day at home and Alice said everything was fine. We sat down at the table and I asked Jack how his day was. He replied that he already had 2 interviews scheduled for the next day, one for a store clerk position and one for a security guard position with a company. I was happy for him. We sat for a while, then grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler so we wouldn't have to go downstairs and went upstairs, wishing each other a good night at 10:45 p.m. Alice and I had already gone to bed. I asked her about her day and Jack's behavior. She mentioned that she hadn't noticed him talking to anyone on the phone about work. When she got home, Jack had just sat around watching TV all evening. This made me a little wary. I suggested we wake up at 3 in the morning and try to discreetly set up cameras in the living room and kitchen. I planned to place a 3rd camera in the hallway on the 2nd floor. We set the alarm, drank some water, and went to bed. I woke up to my wife screaming at 9:20 a.m. She said, "Jonathan, we overslept. Oh my God." I quickly got up and started rushing to get ready for work. I had an appointment for 9 in the morning, and I had to visit each of my establishments before that. On top of that, I had a massive headache and couldn't think straight. It was the first time we all overslept, missing all the alarm clocks. Martin also overslept because no one woke him up. We hastily started packing. The meeting was derailed as I was 50 minutes late. This threw me off balance a lot. I never allowed myself to be late and always criticized people when they were late for business meetings. Because of this, my whole day went off course and so did Alice's day. I got home early at 8 o'clock in the evening. I was very tired, so I just drank some water and went to bed. Today's meeting had been rescheduled for tomorrow at 8 in the morning, and another one was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I dozed off without really thinking much about it. The only thing Alice had told me was that Jack had spent the day at home, but I didn't care. The next morning, we all woke up at 10:30. I slept for about 13 hours, but I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. All of my scheduled appointments were canceled. There were over 60 missed calls on my phone. Martin didn't go to school and was very glad that Alice and I had overslept again. I resigned myself to the fact that my job was falling apart. Calmly, I went downstairs and saw Jack sleeping. I woke him up, and he quickly woke up asking why I wasn't at work since it was getting late. I answered with a question, saying I would be leaving a little later, but didn't specify the exact time. He mentioned that his appointment from yesterday had been rescheduled for today. I decided to confirm the time. He said the appointment was set for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I replied that I would still be home and could give him a ride. However, he insisted on taking a cab, arguing that I should not waste my time. I acquiesced silently. While Alice was upstairs getting ready, I suggested that Jack go to the kitchen for coffee. He agreed. I poured a glass of water from the cooler, drank some, and offered it to Jack. He declined, saying he didn't want any. After a few minutes, he went into the bathroom and did something in there. I noticed that our dog friend was still asleep. I decided to nudge him with my foot. He was alive, just sound asleep, which seemed suspicious to me since he was always hyperactive in the mornings. Now he was asleep. Plus, we were pouring him water from the cooler. At that moment, holding a half-empty glass of water, I rushed into the bathroom and saw Jack leaning over the sink. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was just rinsing his mouth and brushing his teeth. However, there was no toothbrush or toothpaste in the bathroom. He came out of the bathroom, and I tried to spit out the water, but he couldn't. Walked out of the bathroom and saw Alice coming down. I immediately warned her not to drink the water from the cooler. We went into the kitchen. Alice started cooking scrambled eggs. I filled a glass with water and put it in front of Jack, telling him that if he wanted water, he could have it. There was no problem with that. He thanked me but wouldn't drink. We sat in silence for about 3 minutes. Then Jack started talking, noting that we didn't seem to want to ask if he was okay. I assured him that everything was fine, and Alice confirmed that in fact we both had terrible headaches and felt awful. After breakfast, we didn't speak to Jack again. I went upstairs and Jack stayed downstairs watching TV. It was the second or third day since he had moved in with us and things were getting worse. I went downstairs at noon to make sure Jack didn't need another ride. He refused, saying he had already called a cab by then. I asked my friend Russell to drive by my house and watch Jack wherever he went. At 12:15, Jack left the house and got into the car. Russell followed him while I stayed home with my wife and son, canceling all appointments for the week. While Martin played video games in the living room, Alice and I decided to install cameras, one in the second-floor hallway and one in the kitchen. Meanwhile, our dog Buddy woke up, showing the same signs of weakness as we were. In the kitchen, I changed the water in the cooler and decided to send the sample to the lab. I knew something was wrong. Although I had my suspicions, I didn't want to believe them. Why did we start sleeping so much, and why did we feel sick after Jack walked into our house? Why wasn't he drinking water from the cooler? Dark thoughts crossed my mind, but I didn't want to accept them. After setting up the camera in the kitchen, I suggested that Alice check to see if everyone was in their places in the house instead of examining Jack's suit. I went to the bedroom to check the safe with important documents and money. Everything was in place. Alice confirmed that nothing was missing, which eased my negative thoughts. The third camera was set up in the living room. Martin was interested in our activities. We told him that we were installing cameras to monitor Uncle Jack, who was acting strangely. Martin looked at us as if hiding something. When we asked him, he insisted that he didn't know anything. At this time, Russell called. He informed me that Jack didn't go to the interview. Instead, he met with a man, walked with him for an hour and a half, then called a cab and went home. I realized that something terrible was going on. Martin didn't want to talk about the fact that Jack had lied about the interview. Alice and I felt terrible for the second day in a row. I had planned to leave the house as soon as Jack returned to take the water sample to the lab. However, I realized that if I left Martin alone at home, he might inform Jack about our surveillance. So Alice and I decided to send Martin to her parents' house for a couple days until we could get to the bottom of this mysterious situation. Alice quickly packed Martin up and we started to leave. At that moment, a cab pulled up and Jack got out, looking pleased. Alice quickly put Martin in the car. We walked over to Jack, pretending that everything was fine. I told him that Martin wanted to spend time with his grandparents. Jack thought that was cool and headed inside. Meanwhile, we quickly dropped our son off at his grandparents and headed to the lab. I had 3 of my places to stop by, so Alice stayed behind to watch the cameras. We got home at 6:00 p.m. According to the camera footage, Jack had been lying on the couch watching TV the whole time. When we entered the house, I felt it was no longer safe. I didn't know why, but something was starting to really bother me. I asked Jack how the interview went, trying not to arouse suspicion. He replied that he had an internship starting tomorrow at 2:00 in the afternoon at the gas station. I congratulated him heartily, happy for him to have found a job, although it was odd that it was a gas station and not the grocery store or security at the factory we had talked about earlier. The evening went on as usual. We ate dinner and got ready for bed. Before doing so, I went to the garage and called my attorney Craig. I offered him access to the cameras in my house as I was uncomfortable staying in it. I felt that I was unlikely to be able to sleep tonight, even though my condition suggested otherwise. I explained my situation to Craig and he agreed to help. He promised to monitor the cameras all night and call the police in case of any threat. That was the plan. I went back to the house. Alice was already upstairs. She wasn't feeling well. I went upstairs in silence. Suddenly, Jack said good night and asked me if I needed water. I thought to myself that this was suspicious. I purposely went downstairs and got a bottle of water. I decided not to risk drinking that water. I went upstairs and my anxiety increased. 1,000 scenarios flashed through my mind of what Jack could have done while Alice and I were out. The worst part was that our son might have known something but kept quiet. Before I went to bed, I texted Craig to see if he had been able to connect to our cameras. He replied that everything was fine and he was monitoring the situation. Alice was worried too. I told her everything would be fine. We went to bed. She fell asleep quickly and I soon followed her. I woke up in the night. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I felt tense. Without opening my eyes yet, I felt a slight chill run through the room. Quickly, I realized that the door to our bedroom was open. The thought made me freeze. My body began to tremble. There was absolute silence in the room, but I felt someone's presence. It was scary to realize that we always locked the door. I decided to open my eyes a little and look around. The door to our bedroom was to my left, as was Alice's. When I opened my eyes, I saw a dark silhouette standing in the doorway watching us. I couldn't figure out what time it was, whether Craig could see it, or what I should do now. Jack was quietly approaching. Every step he took was audible. I felt Alice poke me with her finger. She was awake, lying on her side, her back to the door. I felt her fear. I remembered that there was a marble statue on the nightstand to my right. Quickly grabbing it, I threw it straight at Jack, hitting him in the head. He was confused and screamed. I quickly got out of bed, grabbed a blanket and threw Jack to the floor. I covered him with the blanket and began to hold him in that position. Alice got out of bed and turned on the light. She picked up the phone and called the police. The phone said that a police unit was on its way and would arrive any minute. I loosened my grip and Jack released his hand, which he used to hit me hard in the face with the statue. I fell to the floor and lost consciousness. After I passed out, my wife saw this and quickly ran to the second floor where she locked herself in the bathroom. Jack started banging on the door, saying he wasn't done with her and wanted her submission. He broke the door down and stormed inside, screaming that he did dirty things to her every night. My wife locked herself in the corner of the bathroom and started sobbing. That's when she heard voices and a thud. Jack was confronted by police officers who had come to apprehend him. He was in good physical shape and had been boxing, so he tried to fight back. However, he was unable to resist the taser and was eventually captured. This morning, I woke up in the hospital with a concussion. Next to me was my attorney, Craig. He told me that he saw Jack stripped naked and saw him climb the stairs, then immediately called the police. This was around 12 o'clock at night. Craig tried to call me, but my phone was on silent mode, so he couldn't reach me. He had already compiled a statement based on my statement and had gotten the results from the lab. It turned out that Jack had put a mixture of medications in our cooler that were very effective. Craig also said that if I pressed charges, my brother could face up to 10 years in prison. Craig continued to talk, but I was preoccupied with another question. Where is my wife, Alice? Craig replied that she had spent all night at the police station giving a statement. She is now seeing a psychologist as she has suffered severe psychological trauma, and I can't see her. I couldn't fully grasp the full magnitude of the situation going on at that moment. Craig kept talking, but I asked him to shut up and take me to Alice immediately. He tried to convince me that it would be better not to, but I had to insist. Eventually, we set off. On the way, I asked him what had happened to Alice, how Jack had hurt her, but Craig remained silent, suggesting I find out from her personally. We arrived at another hospital and quickly found Alice. She looked exhausted, hadn't slept all night, and seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. When she saw me, she immediately ran away. I didn't understand what was going on. I tried to ask the doctors, but they said they couldn't divulge information without Alice's consent. I started yelling, insisting that it was my wife and I needed to know the truth. After 10 minutes of arguing, the head doctor invited me into his office. He was silent for a moment before saying something. He then informed me that my wife Alice had been sexually assaulted by my brother Jack for 2 days. When Jack was questioned at the police station, he detailed his actions. Everything was recorded. Jack turned out to have 10 hours of video footage on his phone of him abusing Alice. The doctor apologized to me and said it was true and that Alice didn't know the whole truth. She only knew what Jack had told her while he was trying to break into the bathroom. The doctors have also done a physical examination, and there is a good chance that Alice is pregnant. However, they need to do a follow-up exam in a week. When I heard this, my world came crashing down. I didn't know how to process everything I heard, and worst of all, I felt guilty. I let this man into our house. I let him sleep on our couch. That's all I could think about. I'll never get rid of this feeling. I asked the doctor to contact me immediately if anything happened and not to say anything to my wife. The doctor added that Alice was in an unstable emotional state and needed to stay in the hospital for at least a couple days before she could be discharged. I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. Upon leaving the hospital, I was deeply depressed. My lawyer said we needed to move to the police station. Alice's parents and my son Martin are there now. Martin, as it turned out, had important information for me. I checked my phone and saw dozens of missed calls from Alice's parents. I went to the police station and was led to the interrogation room. My interrogator was already waiting for me there. Sitting in front of me, Craig started talking. The first thing he said was that my brother had completely lost his human features. Second, he told me that Alice and Martin's parents came to the station this morning. They had spent all night trying to find out from Martin what had happened. One night, Martin woke up and wanted to go to the bathroom. As he left the room, he noticed that the door to my bedroom was open and there was a light on. It was midnight. He looked in the door and saw a man with a camera stand and Jack on my bed with my wife. That's really hard for me to hear. Anyway, Jack noticed Martin and immediately went over to him. He started saying that they were making a movie that would soon be on every screen in the country. Jack insistently asked my son Martin not to tell anyone what was going on, claiming that it should be a surprise. So Martin said nothing. I listened to the investigator and anger boiled up inside me. The investigator explained that we had few options but to put Jack in jail. He also added that Jack had distributed material about how he had abused my wife to at least 3 people. They were all invited to the station to clean their phones. I'm grateful for such prompt work. I spent 5 hours at the station talking to Alice's parents, the investigator, and my attorney. I've decided that the trial will take place without my wife. She doesn't know all the details, and I don't want her to ever find out because it would definitely drive her crazy. The trial was set for the next day. I took my son home and put the house on the market that same day. At the trial, Jack received 20 years of maximum security. It was more than I expected, and a lot of people had influence. During the trial, I couldn't look at him. I felt empty inside and wished I could see my wife as soon as possible. 3 days after the trial, I received a phone call from the doctor. He first gave the good news that Alice was in treatment and wanted to see me. Then followed the bad news, she was pregnant. I didn't know if it was my baby. The doctor convinced me that if she and I hadn't had intimacy in the past week, it definitely wasn't my baby. I asked the doctor to do what needed to be done, and he understood me. The next day, Alyssa was released from the hospital. She didn't understand what had happened to me in the last 5 days, and I hope she never finds out all the details. At the hospital, Alice was convinced that Jack had lied and nothing had happened between them. That calmed her down. All she knows is that he wanted to attack us at night and steal all our savings, and now he's in jail for it. It's been a month since those horrible events ended. Alice and I bought a new house in another city, and I plan to open another restaurant there. Life is slowly getting better. It's hard for me to remember those events. My life has changed dramatically before and after what happened. But now I try to spend more time with my family. I don't know how life will turn out in the future, but I hope for the best. Thank you for your attention to my story. I needed to speak out because I don't want to keep it all to myself. Maybe my experience will help someone, and I sincerely hope none of you are facing something like this. Now that the story has come to an end, I'll be interested to hear what you think. Do you think the main character could have refused his brother and not let him into the house? Why couldn't he foresee such an outcome? Because there were many hints. Why did the brother decide to do this? We believe that the main character's brother was very jealous of him and perhaps did not even lose the parental house, but simply decided to take revenge on the younger for his well-being. What he did was horrible and indescribable. The main character probably could have foreseen it and kicked his brother out as early as the first night, or better yet, not let him into his home at all. I think this story teaches a lot, but the most important thing is that you shouldn't let strangers into your home, whether it's a close relative or a friend. Home is a place where only the people closest to you should be. This horrible story of my brother putting his own brother in jail gives me goosebumps. Thank you for listening to my story. You can also read other equally interesting stories on our channel. Subscribe and put a like to not miss new releases. Good luck to everyone and goodbye.
Thank you so much for watching my video and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button. Also, I am very interested to know your personal opinion about the story. You can write it in the comments. I will definitely read it and reply to you personally.